And I just want to extend a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us this morning at the National Literacy Network. If you are kind of aware that there are a number of people that are maybe a little bit newer to the network in recent months, and if we haven't welcomed you before, a very, very warm welcome to you too. We probably forget that we've been meeting online for such a long time now, and actually there might be some members of the network that haven't met the rest of the network face to face and in person, and that always kind of strikes me. It is on our wish list to meet in person with our National Literacy Network, and when we can do that we will, absolutely, because it's long overdue, I think. So who else is joining us today? Also joining us, I've already mentioned, are Katrina and Alan, ELC education officers, but also I want to extend a really warm welcome to Glenn Carter, who is the head of the Scotland office for the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, and to Gemma Wilson, who is the lead speech and language therapist in NHS Fife. And we're really, really pleased to be welcoming them along to speak to us this morning. And we're actually just going to get started with them very, very quickly, and we'll move our own update to after the break. We want to start with this topic. And why this topic? Well, when we met with Glenn and with Gemma, we talked a lot about the National Literacy Network and the great relationship we have, how well established it is. And we're kind of very aware that, you know, across the different local authorities that join us here, your roles vary, your connections with various different external services vary so much, including SLT services, where in some places and for some people here that connection will be really strong. For others, the connection might be with another part of their wider local authority team. So it felt really, really important to us, particularly at this time, to speak about it at the national network and really to kind of get a bit of a shared understanding between local authorities and between Education Scotland and local authorities about the state of play really in this area, such an important area to talk about. And I'm struck by our conversations, you know, post last December when we got ACIL results, which were down, we know, across all levels and across all organisers. And the writing results screamed at us, you know, and it was what we talked about a lot, and rightly so. The listening and talking results, they were down across the board also, but relative to the reading and writing looked okay. And we're always, you know that we're always curious about the listening and talking results, and we had local conversations about that, around about just that the depth of understanding that we could maybe reach in terms of what is required within listening and talking at early level and throughout. And that really plays into what we're talking about today as well. And what you may also be aware of, we're acutely aware of what's emerging from health visitor data since the nursery and school closures associated with COVID-19, where speech, language and communications most frequently identified as an area of concern, and more so and at the current time. And so for all of these reasons, really, really important to have a piece on this topic today. So I'm not going to blather on for much longer. I'm going to hand over, if David wants to stop sharing, and Glenn, I know you want to get yourself set up as a presenter, so I'll let you do that now. And I'm going to hand over to Gemma and to Glenn now to take us forward to the next part of the meeting. Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, it's a privilege to be here. Thanks for having us. And I would love to hear more about hedgehogs if that was possible at some point. And Bad Girls Bakery. My daughter's totally into horses, so I feel like I've been talked at about horses quite a lot already. So yeah, it's great to be here. My name's Glenn, and I'm the head of the Scotland office for the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. prior to that, I worked in the NHS for 23 years and latterly led a speech and language therapy children and young people service in Forth Valley. And so I've only been in this role about 10 months, but we're really pleased to talk to you about this topic, spoken language and communication needs, and to hear, also to learn from you and to hear what your experience has been, and perhaps hopefully towards the end come up with ideas about solutions together. Yeah, it's interesting to hear about the talking and listening results not looking too bad, and I think we may cover that later about how that's measured, and is it really okay out there, and the impact of spoken language on reading and writing. So before I go on further, I think it's probably worth Gemma introducing herself. Thanks, Gemma.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invitation along. So yeah, as Glenn said, I'm one of his speech and language therapy colleagues. I manage the service in the west of Fife, but has been a speech and language therapist working in schools and mainly secondary schools, but also a bit of experience in primary and nursery as well over the years. So hopefully between us we'll be able to present lots of useful information to you for your roles this morning. Hopefully answer some of your questions during our discussion time as well, and we're going to split the presentation up between us. So Glenn will kick that off and give you lots of information, and then hopefully when we get to it I can give you a few ideas in terms of things we've done, and obviously a bit more of an overview of some of the information in terms of the roles that you have within the establishments that you're supporting as well. So thank you, and lovely to see you all.
Thanks, Gemma. My colleague Lauren Hopp is also here. Lauren, do you want to come on and introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm the policy advisor for the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists in Scotland, and I'm just here to listen to the presentation and learn a bit more about this area. So thanks for inviting me.
Great, thanks both. And so this is an area we've been working on for a long time, and prior to me getting this role, we have been working at a national level to try and develop a plan for children and young people. The pandemic has clearly exacerbated a very significant problem. Now, the problem has always been there, but it has exacerbated and shone a light on it, and I'm really pleased that there's lots of directors across Scottish Government, politicians, Public Health Scotland, Education Scotland speaking to us about this issue, and I think it can't be solved in isolation, which is why we really need to work together on this. Okay, so this is the purpose. We are hoping to understand the problem, why it's important, to explore the links between speech and language and communication and attainment, wellbeing and future life outcomes, and also to explore some solutions together. So we're going to split it up into these sections: why it's important, what is the problem, why is it important, and what are the solutions. So we're going to just jump straight into what is the problem, and we'd love to hear from you. We'll do a Mentimeter just in a second, but is there a problem in terms of talking and listening and spoken language? What have you heard on the ground? Any insights would be really helpful. So I would like you to go to www.menti.com. You can access it on your phone, or there's the link in the note, and I will share a different screen if you don't mind. And once you get to that, once you get to that website, if you could put in the number that's at the top here, which is sorry. There it is. 2204 2642. Just at the top there. So go to menti.com, menti.com, and use the code 2204 2642. This doesn't work. I'll revert to the comments. But yeah, what's the problem you're seeing? Have you heard of any issues out in the real world around children's communication needs, spoken language levels, anything like that? So I'll let you just input any ideas you've got there. Thanks. Mm-hmm. Thanks, everyone. I'll start going through that. Lots of comments there about vocabulary. Yeah, absolutely agree. Pronunciation of sounds. Yeah, I suspect that's a problem as well. Literacy related to communication neglect. So the impact of the lockdowns. What else? Listening skills, poor. Yep. Significant issues in the early years. Yeah, the health visitors checks have consistently shown communication as our highest level of concern, but that has certainly gone up in recent times. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Reading facial expression communication is so much part of our nonverbal communication that children and young people haven't had access to for a long time. And if a child's got language difficulties, it's even harder for them because they tend to rely on nonverbal communication even more. So inability to talk in sentences, that's right. So the complexity of their sentences. There was an interesting one, debate about word gap. Does anybody want to come on and talk about the word gap or any vocab issues they've seen or debates you've had about that? Anybody willing to come on, Mike, to talk about that?
Hi, I wrote that comment about the debate about word gap. I've just been seeing a few things online, particularly from an academic called Ian Cushing. I don't know if you've heard of him.
No.
About racial-linguistic ideologies. Yeah, and just how the word gap is being addressed by SALT and by those working in the early years, but I haven't accessed the research directly myself, so I've just sort of seen it and been aware of it.
Thanks, Pauline. I haven't heard of that. And is that, when you talk about ideologies, is people's different views of whether it's important or not, or what are you thinking? Yeah,
basically, I think, and as I say, I've not accessed it myself, but I think he was suggesting that sometimes we can be looking at kind of a narrow view on the words that maybe children, the vocabulary children need to access, and it can be influenced by our own backgrounds, and it's sometimes children from different ethnicities aren't represented widely enough amongst ourselves, and then that feeds down. But as I say, I haven't, looked at the research myself. I've just seen the kind of
Thanks, Pauline.
Debate.
And it's a really good point, because I think sometimes when we are considering what we think is important, we frame it in a certain way. We look at it through a certain lens and think, right, so if we a middle class lens of everybody should be using these type of words, or everyone should have this number of words, then I can see why that potentially is a problem. And certainly in some of the assessments we use are slanted towards white middle class potentially, so that is an issue. However, there is a very significant amount of research out there to put a clear link between number of words, regardless of what those words are, and future life chances, employment and mental health. So interesting. I'll certainly look that up. That's great to flag that up. Thank you. So people have talked about phonological awareness, listening, and practitioners, are they confident in how to support that? So that's excellent. Thanks so much, everybody. I'll stop sharing that. Okay. So let's move on then. What's the problem? So that's what we just talked about, and I'm just going to talk to you about a case that I came across recently. It was a young chap. Let's call him Jack. That's not his real name. He is much older than these pictures in the photo. I think he was 7 at that point. Now, what we'll come to in a minute is the types of kids with communication needs that we're facing within Scotland. So there's a range of different difficulties. This boy actually has a developmental language disorder, so it's more of a specific speech and language difficulty. And later we'll try and unpick the difference between environmental factors that impact significantly on children's communication and kids who potentially have a genetic or are born with some speech and language difficulties. Now, this chap, regardless of upbringing, he would have had very specific challenges with his language difficulties understanding spoken language, being able to express it. It was a bit like it was a foreign language to him. So developing vocab was very significantly impaired. And I came across him in secondary school when I was holding on to some clinical work in my previous role. And he wasn't diagnosed until he was 14, or rather his needs weren't picked up. He managed to get through primary school he's quite clever in a lot of ways, by copying, by developing strategies. And things really kicked off when he was 14, and demands clearly of curriculum go flying up at that point. And so he asked me this question. He said, how do we make sure this doesn't happen to anybody else? And I think it was a really powerful question, because what he meant by that was, I have had these needs for a very long time. They weren't picked up, and it has impacted him significantly. It impacted his ability to learn, his confidence, his self-esteem, his mental health, ability to make friends. It had a very, very important impact on him. And that question has stayed with me. And I was talking to various groups and saying, look, I think we should be accountable to these young people who have not had the support they need and have slipped through the net for various reasons. And the solutions are complex, and we'll come to them later. But my plan is, we need to come back to this young man and say, well, listen, this is what we think is, how do we make sure this just doesn't happen to anybody else? These are some of the solutions. But it's real. It has real impact on people. Sometimes when you don't hear those stories, it feels otherly. You don't get to nail it down. But this is a very significant issue that we need to address. Equity for All was published last January, and it was a groundbreaking report where Pauline Byrne, you may have heard of her, and Marie Gascoigne were leading on it, but it's the first time in the world where we've managed to map the communication needs of a population. So Scotland's been the first place to do this. You'll see in that the scale of the problem. So we've got 1.1 million children and young people in Scotland at that point, certainly, and 275,000 of them have predicted speech and language communication needs. The good thing about this field is that we've got excellent prevalence data for very high quality prevalence data for children with communication needs, and we're able to predict that well. And this is what I was talking about last time, where we're talking about kids who have very specific speech and language difficulties, 10%, so it's anywhere between 7% and 10%, depending on how you classify it. But the sobering fact here is that in areas of deprivation, more than 50% of children are starting school with poor spoken language skills and inadequate spoken language skills for learning. I suspect that's increased in recent times, and that's a minimum. And these are kids where we're talking about there's a very significant gap. They're struggling to catch up. They're behind in their learning. We actually know how to close this gap, but it's not just a one-off solution. And from research, we know that in order to maintain the closing that gap, you need to keep working right throughout their school career. So it's not just to work it in the early years and sort it and then it'll be fine. 7.5% of kids have developmental language disorder, like Jack, who I talked about, and 1% have more severe and complex speech and language communication needs. And this was again from Equity for All. It's quite a detailed slide, sorry, but it basically shows you the distribution as a percentage of the predicted speech and language communication needs for children and young people across Scotland. The three areas of the highest percentage in there, you'll see NHS, Lanarkshire, Ayrshire and Arran, and Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and together they account for 50% of the total predicted need. But what's interesting is that they've the lowest workforce ratio to need, so something's not quite right. And in this report, they were able to demonstrate that in the areas of highest need had the lowest level of resource. I believe that's not uncommon. That's the same situation with general practitioners as well, but the problem here is that we've got this disconnect between the predicted need and the resource to meet that need. What we showed in the report is that there was inconsistency of offer and some strong statements in the report about there's a significant number of services where the resource is simply inadequate to meet the considerable needs of the population. Now, Helen mentioned health visitor data previously. You know, the early years, of course, impacts your work, and we did a survey with Early Years Scotland of early years practitioners, just asking them what their experience of this was since the pandemic. We got responses from all the local authorities. I think it was 245 responses, and you'll see that 87% of people who responded said they've seen an increase or a significant increase in the numbers of kids with communication needs, or indeed the complexity of those needs. And when asked what's the impact of that, these are their top. We had a range of options, but these were the top impacts. You'll see that the main issue was around ability to interact. There was impact on behaviour, participation, learning, friendships, and well-being. And clearly, the underlying change, they've talked about reduced support from other professionals due to COVID, challenges to parenting due to COVID-19 with lockdowns. And I think that's a really significant impact here. I think the whole population was under stress, and we know that stress impacts parents' interaction and relationships with their kids, how they interact. Perhaps they're a bit more directive and potentially less nurturing. And so that's related to any type of stress, but we know poverty is a particular stressor, where families are just in survival mode. So these sorts of things become particularly challenging. The early years practitioners talked about the use of technology also, and the lack of exposure to interactions with grandparents or friends. So there's a reduced number of interactions that have had a significant impact on these children. Just a comment there, our setting has noticed a significant increase in pupils who are presenting with speech and language development issues. It's difficult to know whether this comes as a result of COVID or a shift on our cultural dependency on screens. Lockdown has impacted on children's language and communication, as well as social and educational development. So it's had a very significant impact, as you know. And someone mentioned the confidence of practitioners. You'll see that confidence of the early years practitioners isn't all that high in meeting these kids' needs, and I suspect that's reflected in primary and secondary, although we haven't asked them that. So I'm going to stop there in terms of what's the problem and hand over to Gemma about why it's important. Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to take you through a few slides that I hope would be useful for you in your roles. Obviously, we don't know you as a group, so we're assuming a level of understanding and interest in the topic, but we're aware that you'll be talking to a range of different people in terms of explaining why we need to have a focus on speech, language and communication. So we just wanted to share a few slides with you. I haven't been able to get control of the slides, Glenn, so are you...
I can do it for you, yeah.
Okay, am I going to have to do a COVID type presentation with next slide, please? Okay, so next slide, please. So I just wanted to talk you through the ages and stages, because I'm aware we have a really mixed audience here, and just give you a little bit of a flavour of some of the information from each of the settings. Okay. So in terms of the early learning and childcare settings, as some of you mentioned at the start, the information that we have about children entering these settings is that speech, language and communication is one of the most significant concerns. So you'll see down on the bottom right there that some of the stats from the I suppose the most recent publication we can get from Public Health Scotland in terms of the levels of speech, language and communication that they're aware of from that assessment. But in terms of the practitioners that you're working with, we obviously really want to highlight the importance of spoken language in terms of the children's ability to engage in the meaningful activities that they're providing in these settings. And obviously we know that there is a significant focus on learning through play at this age and stage for children, but actually your spoken language skills are still hugely essential regardless of the mode of learning. And as we know, speech and language skills are obviously hugely important for the relationships that children are forming with each other, with their caregivers and with their wider environment at that stage, which has a significant impact on their ability to develop their social skills, which again we've talked about in terms of the COVID lockdown and what impact we're seeing on the children and young people because of that. And we know again that the important aspects in terms of behaviour, emotional regulation and all the things that start to emerge for children at this early stage again have very significant links to their speech and language skills. We have lots of stats and things coming from the research that shows us that actually there's a very significant link between speech and language delay and obviously future issues with behaviour and emotional regulation. We know at this early stage as well that our boys are more at risk in terms of the level of concerns in that population. And we also know that from our poverty stats that again the children and young people in the CIMD1 areas are at more risk. And again, obviously poverty has fairly significant factors for these children in their wider life chances. But again, from a speech, language and communication aspect, it's fairly significant too. Okay, next slide, please. So thinking about our colleagues in primary schools, again, a lot of you highlighted at that early stage around vocabulary, but we know that one of the key factors in terms of the attainment gap is looking at these early difficulties in language, and again our disadvantaged children are at more concern in terms of their ability to access education and also their future success in education. Again, for your colleagues, when we're talking about this as an important issue, we really need to address the fact that our spoken language skills have a hugely significant impact on our academic attainment. And we know that, again, the research shows us that that has a significant impact on our literacy skills and our numeracy development, which will be of concern to lots of people in the primary school settings. We mentioned at the start about vocabulary, and really it is that concept that the rich get richer. If you have good vocabulary skills, you develop more, and therefore you develop better language skills. So again, our children with these poor skills at primary school entry, although school will support them and develop them in terms of bringing those skills on, the gap between the able and the less able in terms of talking and listening becomes more significant throughout their primary school career. And those of you who are practitioners will know, again, the importance of speech and language skills in terms of that friendship element, the ability to develop and maintain those friendships in primary school, and how important that can be for children in terms of their own behaviour, their own sense of worth, and also their mental health quite significantly, even at that early stage in primary school. So although we're painting a fairly bleak picture, there's obviously lots of things that are protective factors for these children and young people too. And although the socioeconomic factors are significant, we also know because of the clinical population that we will have children from a range of socioeconomic groups that may have difficulties with their speech and language skills at primary school stage that the practitioners are actually supporting. So although disadvantaged social background is a concern, it doesn't mean it's the only factor that we need to take into consideration when we're thinking about speech, language and communication. Okay, so if I could move on to secondary school, for those of you who are supporting practitioners at that stage. We know that our young people at that level have higher incidence of longer term behavioural and social difficulties because of their speech, language and communication needs, and that probably comes as no surprise to any of you. And also this perception that actually that social circle becomes more challenging at a secondary school level. So the language demands have increased significantly in secondary school because of the range of subject areas and obviously the demands that go with subject-specific vocabulary. But we also know that, again, the assessment processes that go with secondary school have fairly significant effects on your future life chances if you're not able to follow that academic success route, and again, to be able to be guided and supported into other areas that you're going to be able to flourish. And we also know at a secondary school level that, again, that sense of self and your mental well-being are so linked to your communication difficulties, and also your communication opportunities that you have. We talk a lot at secondary school level about the complexity of peer relationships and how, again, having good speech and language skills helps you navigate those kind of relationships that develop more significantly at that stage in your life, and also the situations that young people find themselves into. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence from the young people that we know with speech, language and communication difficulties at this stage that they're often the ones that end up in trouble, because they're not very good at talking themselves out of trouble, and also they're often the young people that end up in difficult situations with the police, because they don't have those good communication skills to be able to explain what's happened, to be able to explain where the situations have gone wrong, and also to be able to explain what their role was in the situation. So again, that interaction with the criminal justice system can start to emerge because of poor speech, language and communication needs at this stage. I only have English data from the academic reporting there. I don't actually have the information for Scotland, but the stats that we have there is around 20% of pupils with speech, language and communication needs that were identified at secondary stage are gaining a grade C or above in their English or maths at GCSE level, and that's compared to around 63% of all pupils. So again, a fairly significant impact on academic success at secondary level. Okay, and if I could just follow on to my final slide in terms of the longer term outcomes for consideration. So in one of the studies that we wanted to share with you, 88% of young men who were long-term unemployed had a speech, language and communication need, which is a fairly significant factor in terms of academic success and obviously longer term outcome for employment opportunities. So we know that spoken language is very current in terms of the job market at the moment. Regardless of the advert that you look at, good communication skills are usually highlighted as one of the key skills, often alongside computing and literacy skills in terms of gaining employment and then maintaining employment. And that's been a real shift in the job market over the past 10, 20 years. And lots of employers are reporting that actually communication difficulties in the workplace is one of the significant factors why some job roles will break down. It obviously has a very significant impact in terms of your future life opportunities because of your earning potential and the kinds of jobs that you can access depending on your level of ability in being able to sell yourself as an employee and obviously being able to have success in the employment sector. Communication skills are obviously hugely important for advocating for yourself in terms of making developments in the workplace, but it's also a fairly significant factor in terms of actually accessing any sorts of supports that are available. And as speech and language therapists, we often have contact with some young people that we have supported in the past when they get to adult stages and actually they're really experiencing quite significant challenges in explaining their needs to either employers or to sources of support, and also identifying then how they can actually access the benefit system in terms of the impact that speech, language and communication can have on them, because it isn't hugely well understood in the broader world. And obviously it's hugely important to maintain your healthy relationships around you in adulthood, whether that's with a partner or the family that can support you, and your communication needs will have a significant impact on whether you can do that successfully and maintain those support mechanisms around you, or whether there's a level of breakdown that occurs. Okay, thank you. Good, I have the next slide. So what we wanted to do was to really have, I suppose, a little bit of a conversation with you now. Glenn, are we just going to use the chat for this one, or will we go back to Minty?
Well, Gemma, I think our time is pretty good. Helen asked before we came on whether we might get into groups to talk about solutions. So I think that's probably a good shout. But before we do that, Helen, everybody, would be okay for just to reflect just briefly on what Gemma's covered about what why it's important and what I said about what's the problem is, the extent. Is there anything that struck you as particularly important or surprising or unsurprising? Anything that struck you in what we've said so far? If you wouldn't mind just having a quick reflection and sticking it in the chat, that'd be really helpful. Or indeed, coming off mute and telling us what you think. And then we'll break into groups to talk about some of the solutions, if that's okay. So have a think and stick in the comments anything that you think is particularly important and struck you in what we've covered so far.
And Gemma, while people are thinking, and cameras and mics welcome too, as well as in the chat pane, the one that struck me early on was just the connection right through to the attainment gap, and just that being quite stark, because I know that colleagues in the room today working within, they'll have their work will be affected by the refreshed Scottish Attainment Challenge, and those numbers, literacy-wise for the gap, they concern listening and talking, but they concern reading and writing as well. And one wee sort of wondering I have in my head is just, in the system, are the connections between speech, language and communication through to reading and writing, are they well enough recognised? Is that awareness there around about that? So those are my thoughts, but I see others
Helen,
coming in.
Yeah, thanks. And Helen, yeah, it's a really important point. I think that the connection between those are well established in the literature. I'm not sure out in the system whether it is. It's certainly emerging, and I think what we're trying to do is change the narrative slightly and flip it and say that spoken language communication isn't like a small arm of literacy. We need to think differently about it and think of it as foundational for learning and well-being and future life chances, rather than an offshoot which we sort of measure. So that's what we're trying to move to. But I see David's got his hand up.
Yeah, hi, sorry, I just popped my hand up there before the chat was starting to get populated. I think what really strikes me about my background is secondary, but what strikes me about some of those statistics is that, when you find that out, it makes perfect sense, and it isn't, it doesn't surprise you, because you can see actually, the correlation between that is absolute. Those children who, as I think Angela's pointed it out in the chat there as well, the percentage of prisoners with speech and language communication needs and stuff like that, but also just quite simply that our system is not set up to support those kids, that they still go through those same exams, they still go through the same kind of batching and processing that all the other children do as well, and that, there maybe needs to be an awareness of that so that we can better mitigate the difficulties that those children face.
Thanks, David. Yeah, a great point. And I think people mentioned the prisoner population, that depending on what research you look at, but certainly young people in connection with the law, there's over 60% of them are presented with speech and language communication needs. But it's obviously very complex, but it's right throughout the system. Thank you. So I'm just, Gemma, if there's any comments or anything we want to pick up on.
Yeah, I suppose the link between the spoken language and reading, again, someone has messaged that or mentioned the Matthew effect there. And again, it's that idea that the oral aspect of word learning has quite a significant impact on your ability to learn more words, and again an awful lot of elements to do with your spoken language skills, your ability to perceive words, to understand words from oral communication really impact on your ability to break them down, store them correctly, and then add more. So yes, fairly significant links between that aspect of spoken language vocabulary and then impact into your reading and literacy.
Yeah, great. And I thanks Lucy and Katie, you both picked up on that thing where we're trying to track all the way through the lifespan. So yes, we're focused on children and young people, of course, but what we're trying to say to Scottish Government and everybody is we can't sit in our silos and try and address this. We need a cross agreement from health, education, justice, employment, early years to come together and properly come up with a solution for this, because we can't afford not to come up with a solution. So that's helpful. So we mentioned solutions there. Thank you for all the comments. We'll hopefully gather them together if that's okay, Helen, at some point. If we could spend 5 minutes in groups, Helen, just talking about what people have come across in regards to solutions. Our next section is what is the solution to this? Have you come across things that work well out in the system? Have you been involved in stuff yourself? Think big, whatever you like. But if someone in your group wouldn't mind taking notes, and then we come back, if you could stick those notes in the comments box, that would be really helpful. I know 5 minutes isn't very much, but I'm aware of time. Helen, does that sound okay?
That sounds fine. I'm about to push the button. If we brought people back, I'm seeing it's 10:47. If we brought people back at 55, just before that.
Sounds good.
Okay?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm about to work the magic. Hang on a wee second.
Thanks.
I think there's going to be some people left behind, so I'll quickly.
Fine.
I'll come in. We were talking about the sort of importance of total communication environments and that being kind of consistent right through from early years through into secondary. One of the people in the group was talking about how the local authority had bought boardmaker licenses for all schools so that there was that consistent use of the sort of symbolic support. And just the kind of, there are accreditation programs going on in different local authorities around schools working towards those kind of approaches.
Yeah, thanks, Katrina. That's really important, the total communication or communication-friendly environments, which I suspect most areas have. They'll be perhaps slightly different, and that was one of our key messages. Things will be different wherever you are, but there's lots of good work going across Scotland. It doesn't mean one's better than the other, but we can certainly learn from each other. Anything else someone wants to share? Notice, Audrey, we talked about the Words Up programme and some LCLAN training going on in Angus. Thank you for that. Anything else that you've come across that works?
Might even just go around the rooms, Glenn. Katrina, you were in room 5. Room 3, I'm just doing it at random, was Angela, Lucy, Gemma, you were there too, and Louise. Does somebody want to come up on mic just to give us a flavour?
Anne spoke a wee bit about the Oracy programme that we are piloting or piloted last year and continue to run in North Ayrshire, but
Angela's frozen. Oh no, she's back.
Oh, have I frozen, have I?
Back.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Am I back? Right. So the schools who piloted an Oracy programme last year, we're hoping to extend that by applying for Paul Hamlin funding and using drama as a medium for communication skills over a 2-year period. So that's one of the things.
Interesting.
Because, yeah, and what else did we speak about, Gemma? We spoke about secondary as well. I think Louise was saying how she felt in secondary we hadn't really got there yet. We were so focused on closing the gap and catching it early. And I was speaking a wee bit about the disciplinary approach for note-making skills, for example. If all departments get involved and teach those skills, and then each department has the guidelines and the tips specific to their vocabulary, and that's been really successful in Garnet Community Campus, and that's a life skill for job interviews and studying, etc. So
sounds great. Thanks, Angela. Great feedback.
No problem.
Thank you. Should we try another group, Helen?
Yeah. I lost them now. I'm noticing Leona and Gail talking about SWEC building blocks. I wonder if even from that, Leona's room 2, from that room, either talk about that or anything else that was going on within the room.
Hi there. I'll say a little bit about the SWEC building blocks of literacy. It came about because of COVID, really. We had started this off as a face-to-face in-person sessions with our Primary 1 teachers, and the first 2 inputs in the building blocks of literacy were based on attention and listening, being that foundational skill, and then it went on to phonological awareness and speech sound development as well. With that, I suppose the thing that we were keen to support our teachers with was that how literacy develops, or how phonics develops from phonological awareness or phonemic awareness, but also how important it was that teachers had an understanding of these foundational skills, not so that they could supplant or replace speech and language therapists, but for the majority of our children, that universal support is really, really important. We get that right, that obviously then reduces that need perhaps for more intensive intervention from specialist speech and language support,
Absolutely.
which is just not available. So that was really part of that building blocks. The rest of it was about reading and writing and so on, and phonics as well, but the first two parts were led by our speech and language therapy team.
Thank you. And that's an excellent point about the universal stuff, which I'm just about to come to in a second. Maybe one more comment, Helen, then we'll move on.
Yeah. Room 1, I'm going there. That was Vicky, Julie, Anne, Katrina and Pauline.
We spoke about the biggest resource out there, which is parents, and how do we galvanise them into doing a bit better than they're doing. So recognising that parents don't want to do a bad job.
Yeah.
How do we get them, especially if they have their own difficulties and require that support themselves?
Totally. Thanks, Vicky. That's an essential point. And we've been working with Public Health Scotland on some of the challenges that we face out there with how do we support parents to understand what this is and how to improve spoken language of their kids. That's an excellent point. So shall I then, I'm in the solutions bit, I'm just going to start it off, and then Gemma's going to talk about more specific stuff, but I'll talk about the high level model things. They were really good examples. Thank you, everyone. There's loads going on out there. Let me just get this presentation up. Okay, so in terms of a model, people were talking about parents and family support environments. You've mentioned workforce development. We certainly across Scotland have been using a whole system approach around this, and that's one of our key messages here. We can't just throw interventions at this and ignore parents, for instance. This is, in order to deliver this well, we need to have good offers for parents at a national and universal level, but also locally to support them. And what we do know threaded throughout these is that relationships on the ground are really important. So relationships with practitioners, education practitioners and parents, relationships between speech and language therapists and educators and parents. This is underpinned by relationships. Someone mentioned the total communication, or a good communication environment is also very important. The workforce need to feel empowered and have the confidence to improve spoken language because they are with them all the time. We need to be good at identifying these kids. We talked about how the Jack I talked about had fallen through the net. We hadn't picked up on his needs, or he masked those needs. So identification is really key. And of course, interventions. But I think sometimes when we think about these things, we think, well, what intervention is going to sort this? But actually, that in itself is not going to be sufficient to address these issues. All of these strands need to be delivered. And the last person spoke, it says Miss Elder, I'm not sure what your first name is, but you touched on universal approaches. So when we look at these 5 strands, what we're looking at across Scotland is not just these 5 strands, but these 5 strands at a universal level. So what we're offering at a universal level for all educators, for all parents, for all the environments they're working in. And then if that isn't sufficient for these kids' needs, then they step up to targeted. So at the targeted level, again, all of these offers need to be in place, but at a more specific level. And then again, if that's not sufficient, then they go up to the individualized. So, and that's not just about resource around speech and language therapy. That's just because that's the right thing to do. And we want to be least intrusive for these families who should be able to have their needs met at a universal level if possible. And then if they need to step up, then of course they can get individualized support and assessment, but that is most intrusive. And actually I would argue in order to make that work, you need the foundation of the universal and targeted work already in place. So our point is, and I'm going to get to use this as we're coming up to Christmas or anywhere near Christmas, is you can't just have, you need to think about trifle. So you can't just have the cream or the custard or the jelly. You've got to have it all in order for it to make it work. So we've got to think broadly about this issue, and the solutions are complex, but hopefully we've outlined a helpful model just to show you how it could potentially work. So at a national level, we are speaking to Scottish Government about coming up with the Children and Young People's Plan for kids and young people communication needs. And I mentioned earlier that we feel that there's lots of areas that need to be involved in that, including Education Scotland. About what role would you play in that? Of course, we need to scale up best practice. You may or may not know that we are working on developing 6 national roles as early intervention leads who will be speech and language therapists trying to support and work alongside in Education Scotland, which is a fantastic development, because I think cross-boundary working is where the power is. So that's a very positive development. But we're also saying these solutions need to be in place, but we can't ignore the fact that speech and language therapy services are very vulnerable to funding cuts all over the place, because in our view that sometimes people aren't owning it. Well, where do they sit, for instance, because we're so relevant to all different sectors, and the supply issues. So as I said previously, the thing that makes this work is local relationships. We know we've got significant vacancies in speech and language therapy, and the number of students not being produced is not keeping up with demand. So we need to find a way to sort that. That's an important part of this solution. So I'll hand over to Gemma for some other specific ideas. Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you. Okay, I feel slightly apprehensive talking through the literacy elements with a room full of literacy experts, but hopefully you'll bear with me as I use one of the tools to try and talk about some of the things that we've done. So I've put it as a potential solution because I would be really interested in your thoughts. So in terms of best practice for supporting speech, language and communication needs, it is about them being embedded within the curriculum. So it's about things being embedded in what the child is doing. So obviously speech and language therapy intervention on an individual level is required for some children, but in order to support speech, language and communication, it is about embedding it in the curriculum. And it's really about identifying the learning opportunities for children where we can really support the boosting of the profile of these skills. So I carried out some work in Fife as part of the Scottish Attainment Challenge. It was a SIMD1 school, and we were looking very much at the talking and listening aspect of these, because the teachers were identifying it as a significant concern. But what they were aware of, which is something that we touched on at the very start, was it wasn't coming up on the attainment trackers, but they really felt it in the classroom. What we also really spent some time talking about and exploring with practitioners was their confidence and competence to really assess the talking and listening element of the children's learning. And that was something that the teachers were quite happy to admit that was an area of concern for themselves in terms of what they were noticing, what they were identifying, and really where they were underlying some of these issues for the children in their classes. So we took the essential indicators. And as a speech and language therapist, I brought my professional knowledge to really look at some of the underlying skills that are required for these quite broad statements in terms of success. So Glenn, if you could move us on to the next slide. What we tried to do, so giving you an example of your enjoyment and choice, we really took all the comprehension skills, so all the understanding skills that are required to achieve success in that outcome, and then we looked at the expressive skills, so the talking side of things that the children needed to be able to do in order to show their confidence and competence at that level. So we really explored all the concepts involved in these broad statements. We looked very specifically at some of the vocabulary that the children required. We looked again at sentence level, so the grammar that they needed to know and understand and use to have success. We spent a lot of time looking at question words and the kinds of things that children need to be able to understand and use to have success. And we looked a lot at their language skills in terms of the broader sense, so their listening, what active listening looks like, what children need to be aware of when they're listening, and also the strategies that they can put in place to support their memory and recall. So we really tried to tease these things out at quite a specific skill level, so that the teachers would have a better ability to assess the children in their class. And then we were able to identify some very specific strategies to put in place whenever they were able to be sure about where the level of breakdown was occurring for the children and where we could actually put in some improvement projects for the young people. So as you can imagine, vocabulary and grammar came out quite specifically for the children in this cohort. So we spent a lot of time trying to explore where we could achieve some success, and actually it boiled down to short periods of conversation with a skilled adult sitting down with a small group of children to actually have a conversation and boost their language skills. So we used lots of resources. We had loads of things in terms of what the school had access to that was part of their toolkit. But again, we tried to put a very specific slant on the vocabulary elements, the grammar elements, and actually these children showed real success really quickly. So we used quality improvement methodology to do daily recording of them, and actually used some run charts to just capture the changes in their language skills. And within a couple of weeks, we had children with talking with extended utterances and actually using more sophisticated grammar. They were children that were kind of middle of the road in terms of classroom attainment, so they weren't children requiring speech and language therapy intervention, and they weren't children with more complex needs in terms of other additional medical diagnoses, but just that small amount of input really gave us quite a significant change in their language skills. So if I just go into the next slide really quickly. So it was that clear analysis that the teachers required a bit more of a boost. And again, I'm thinking of some of your roles in terms of supporting people with that identification of talking and listening skills in the classroom. What could we do to actually help people analyse those things better? The tool that I've developed is something, but again, I would really appreciate more conversation and discussion about something like that if it was going to be something that we could use. I think boosting teachers' confidence actually in assessing talking and listening is something quite significant. And again, those conversations at a local level about where that confidence comes from and actually where they get that skill set to do it. And what we have identified that I'll show you on the next slide is actually a suite of resources that are available for classroom practice. They obviously come from a speech and language therapy evidence base, so you'll have a huge raft of things in education. And also we have an awful lot of learning from across Scotland in terms of the local improvement projects that lots of you will be aware of that are really boosting talking and listening. And what we hope is with these national posts that actually some of that work can really be scaled up, and hopefully over the next couple of years really look at what's working for specific children in specific areas of needs, and actually how that can be taken much more broadly. So my last slide for you before we break and have a bit of a conversation is again to think about the resources quite strategically. So first of all, your universal level. So before we do anything to support children's talking and listening or their speech, language and communication, where are your workforce in terms of confidence and competence to actually think about talking and listening and speech, language and communication? Do we have a skilled workforce in our establishments, and what do we need to do about that? So the speech and language and communication framework is something that was developed as part of this strategy in England. I'm hopeful that as part of the work in Scotland over the next few years we'll have something more bespoke for our settings, but this would certainly be a starting point for you. We've put the link to the Communication Friendly Classrooms, which again is a research and evidence-based resource. When you look at it, it came out of the Better Communication Research Project, which was a big piece of work through a number of English universities quite a few years ago. You'll recognise work that is being done locally when you see it, but that's the kind of starting point for it, to really look at the settings that you're supporting. And then my final slide before we run out of time, is just a few links to some of the targeted resources that as speech and language therapists we would like you to have a think about, and where that sits in terms of what we're doing in the classrooms. So the vocabulary interventions that we talked about, the colourful semantics, which again some of you may be aware of in practice, that supports that grammatical side of things and really brings together some of the elements of oral language, and where that can go then for your literacy skills, but also the writing element of what we're trying to support in the classroom. And then a final link to narrative therapy, which some of you may be aware of, and I've just put a link to a blog that you can have a read about, and again where the lines between competence and confidence in talking will really spill over into attainment for writing. So hopefully you can have a chance as a group to maybe look at some of those things in the future, and maybe Glenn and I can engage with you in different ways to have some further conversations about these things as the national and the regional posts move forward next year. So thank you very much. I will stop there, and
Thanks,
hopefully
Gemma.
we've got 2 minutes left for any closing thoughts.
And just to follow up, thank you, Gemma. And I suppose where you are locally, they'll have different approaches for these sorts of things. I think Gemma's given a brilliant overview of some of the background and where they will have come from. So certainly when we were working in Forth Valley, we used the principles of the vocab interventions, colourful semantics, which are, those two key things are really important in developing children's spoken language skills, particularly, when we were working in primary schools around. There's an approach called Word Aware, which is a very education-friendly resource, which some of you may have become aware of. Lots of great education solutions to that. And there's colourful semantics interventions that's available. You need to be careful about which one you pick, I think, but there's certainly one that was developed and published. You can get that on Amazon quite easily. So these are things that work and have been proven to work and are really effective, that educators can get on with and deliver. So we are almost all at the time. I just want to go back to Jack for a second and the question that he asked. And his story did end well. And I think the reason it ended well was because we managed to collaborate really well in his school to work out what he required at the whole school level. We took a whole school level. We did training and development with staff. They were brilliant in taking it on board, and they adapted their work to suit his learning needs. And that was an individualized approach, of course, but the sustainable way of doing this is to embed it in schools where we have good environments, where teachers understand what's required and how to improve spoken language. And also he did have some individualized support. And I think I got a lovely email from his mum a while back just saying that he wanted to let you know that how well he did in his exams. He passed, I'll read you a section of it. He passed all his Nat 5s. He sat with A's and B's, which is amazing. And even better, he was at a meeting today with a massive grin on his face, articulating what he needs in terms of learning support into 5th year as he goes on to do hires, including English. All down to him, but he's very aware of how pivotal the support you provided and how it opened the door to unlocking what works for him and what you did to enable his network of support to affect positive change and impact for him as a learner. I want to say thank you for intervening for our little boy when you did and the way you did it. But best of all, we have our happy, fun-loving boy back. And I think, the answer to his question wasn't just SLT. It was also educators who understood it and worked really hard on it, and a willingness across the whole school to do something about this. So it is possible. And there's lots of good stories out there, but there's lots of stories that we haven't managed to improve yet. So thank you for listening. Happy to hear any questions. I'm aware that we're out of time now. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you so much. What a great kind of comprehensive input, and the chat's been going like a fair as well, and lots of questions, comments, reference to what's going on locally, which is great, which we can also share back to you so that you can kind of have a bit of a review of that. And we, when we met, we do see this as the beginning of a conversation, a really, really useful and helpful conversation. The prospect of the 6th national posts is very exciting here as well, just as something that can really bring things together for all of us, for everybody that's sitting at the table today. We do have a break planned in for now, and this is time to get away from the screen and get a cup of coffee and a comfort break. And we're due to start back at past. Glenn, Gemma, if people even just wanted to ask you something quickly before they nipped away, are you happy just to hang on, just even for a wee 5 minutes? But otherwise, please do